5 murder mysteries, so insane they don't seem real. In 1991, a wealthy couple was found brutally murdered in their Texas mansion. The crime scene was so bizarre that investigators couldn't believe what they were seeing. Frozen desserts had been carefully placed on the victims' bodies. The killer had stayed in the house for days after the murders, eating their food, watching their TV, and sleeping in their beds. When police finally identified the suspect, they discovered he'd committed an almost identical crime just months earlier. But here's what makes this case truly insane. He wasn't arrested for either murder. He walked free, and what happened next would shock an entire nation. Welcome back to Case Noire. I'm diving into 5 murder cases that are so bizarre, so twisted, that they genuinely sound like fiction. But every single detail you're about to hear actually happened. Case number 1, the ice cream killer. Let's start with that Texas case I just mentioned, because the full story is even stranger than you think. Morris Black and Kathy Durst lived comfortable lives in Galveston, Texas. Well, actually, that's not entirely true. The man who would become known in connection with this case was Robert Durst, a real estate heir worth millions who was living in Galveston disguised as a mute woman named Dorothy Siner. Yes, you heard that right. A millionaire was cross-dressing and pretending to be unable to speak while living in a cheap apartment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to December 9th, 1981. That's when Robert Durst's wife, Kathy Durst, disappeared from their New York home. She was 29 years old, a medical student with her whole life ahead of her. Robert claimed she took a train back to the city after a weekend in the suburbs, but she never arrived at her school. She vanished without a trace. For nearly 20 years, Kathy's case went cold. Then in 2000, Susan Berman, a close friend of Robert Durst, who reportedly knew details about Kathy's disappearance, was found shot execution style in her Los Angeles home. The day before investigators planned to question her about Kathy's case. This is where things get really weird. After Berman's murder, Durst fled to Galveston and started living as Dorothy. He rented a cheap apartment and kept to himself. His neighbor was Morris Black, a 71-year-old drifter. On October 9th, 2001, a teenage boy was fishing in Galveston Bay when he discovered a human torso floating in the water. It was wrapped in garbage bags. Over the next few days, more body parts surfaced. Arms, legs, all dismembered and wrapped separately. But there was no head, and without a head, identification would be difficult. Investigators got lucky. They found a newspaper inside one of the bags with an address label still intact. It led them to Morris Black's apartment. When they arrived, they found massive amounts of blood, but the apartment was empty. Police started investigating the building. That's when they knocked on Dorothy Siner's door, the quiet neighbor who never spoke. The person who answered was Robert Durst, and he immediately became their prime suspect. Durst was arrested, but not for murder initially. He'd fled and was caught shoplifting a chicken sandwich from a Pennsylvania grocery store, despite having $500 cash in his pocket and thousands more in his car. When they searched his vehicle, they found $37,000 in cash, 2 guns, and marijuana. Here's where the legal system gets complicated. Durst admitted to killing and dismembering Morris Black. He admitted it, but his legal team argued self-defense. They claimed Black had pulled a gun during a struggle. It went off, and Durst panicked. The dismemberment and disposal? Just a scared reaction, they said. In November 2003, a Texas jury found Robert Durst not guilty of murder. They believed his self-defense claim. He served less than 3 years for evidence tampering and bail jumping. Now remember, this is a man whose wife disappeared in 1981, whose best friend was executed right before she could talk to police, and who killed and dismembered a neighbor in 2001. He walked free. The story doesn't end there. In 2010, a filmmaker named Andrew Jarecki made a documentary series called The Jinx about Robert Durst. In the final episode, which aired in March 2015, Durst went to the bathroom while still wearing his microphone. He didn't realize it was recording, and he said, quote, "What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course." The day before that episode aired, police arrested Robert Durst for Susan Berman's murder. In September 2021, 40 years after his wife disappeared, Robert Durst was finally convicted of first-degree murder. He died in prison 4 months later, at age 78, still maintaining his innocence, despite his recorded confession. Case number 2, the affair that led to a family massacre. Moving from Texas to Kansas, where in 2004, A case unfolded that seemed more like a soap opera than a murder investigation, until it ended in unimaginable violence. Fran Donnelly was a high school English teacher in Overland Park, Kansas. She was 36 years old, married, and well-liked in her community. In the fall of 2004, she started mentoring a student who was struggling academically. His name was David Hacker, and he was 17 years old. According to court documents, what began as tutoring sessions evolved into an inappropriate relationship. By November, they were allegedly meeting in secret. Text messages later recovered by police showed they communicated constantly, sometimes hundreds of times per day. Fran's husband, Steve Donnelly, started noticing changes in his wife's behavior. She was distant, protective of her phone, staying out late. In January 2005, he confronted her. She admitted to the affair. Steve Donnelly didn't go to police. He didn't file for divorce. Instead, according to prosecutors, he started planning something far darker. On March 16, 2005, Steve called 911 at 7:43 in the morning. He was crying, almost incoherent. He said there had been a break-in. His wife was dead. When police arrived at the Donnelly home, they found a scene of absolute carnage. Fran Donnelly had been shot multiple times, but she wasn't the only victim. The couple's 3 children, Tyler, 14, Amanda, 11, and Luke, 8, had all been shot while they slept in their beds. None of them survived. Steve Donnelly told investigators that he'd heard noises around 6:30 a.m., went downstairs, and found a masked intruder. The intruder shot Fran, then ran upstairs. Steve claimed he tried to chase him, but was too late to save his children. The killer allegedly escaped through a window. Detectives weren't buying it. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. And Steve had gunshot residue on his hands, which he explained away by saying he touched his wife's body. The real break came when investigators examined the family's computer. They found that Steve had been researching the affair obsessively. He'd read every text message between his wife and David Hacker. He'd looked up information about crime scene investigation. And in the days before the murders, he'd searched for variations of how to stage a home invasion. But here's what made the case even more disturbing. Ballistics showed that Steve had shot his wife first downstairs. Then he walked upstairs and methodically shot each of his 3 children one by one in their beds. Then he came back downstairs, shot his wife several more times, and called 911. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Steve Donnelly was so consumed by rage over the affair that he decided to destroy his entire family rather than face the embarrassment of divorce. The defense tried to argue that someone else could have committed the murders, but the evidence was overwhelming. In October 2006, Steve Donnelly was convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, where he remains today. David Hacker, the student at the center of the affair, was never charged with any crime. He testified at the trial and has reportedly lived a quiet life since, though the case obviously traumatized him. Fran Donnelly's family released a statement saying they believed she'd made a terrible mistake, but that nothing justified what Steve did to her or their children. Case number 3, the killer who mailed his confession. In February 1996, police in Wheaton, Illinois, received a package in the mail. Inside was a typed letter, detailed and matter-of-fact, describing a murder. The writer explained how he'd killed a woman named Karen Phillips in 1982, 14 years earlier. He provided specific details about the crime scene that had never been made public. He explained his method, his motive, and even his emotional state during the killing. Then, he signed it with his real name and address. The letter writer was Stephen Epperly, a 37-year-old man living in Illinois. When police showed up at his door with the letter, he calmly confirmed everything he'd written. He told detectives that guilt had been consuming him for over a decade, and he couldn't live with it anymore. He wanted to confess, face justice, and accept whatever punishment came. Here's what made the case so strange. Karen Phillips was never reported missing. Police had no unsolved murders matching her description in their files. If Epperly hadn't confessed, no one would have ever known she was killed. Investigators started digging into Karen Phillips's background. She was a 28-year-old woman who lived alone and worked as a waitress. She had few close friends and a strained relationship with her family. When she stopped showing up to work in 1982, her employer assumed she'd quit without notice. something that apparently happened occasionally in the service industry. Her landlord eventually cleared out her apartment for non-payment of rent. No one filed a missing person report. According to Epperly's confession, he met Karen at a bar in Chicago. They talked for hours and eventually went back to her apartment. He claimed they'd been intimate, but then an argument started. He said she became aggressive, threatening to call police and accuse him of assault. In his version of events, he panicked and strangled her to stop her from calling. After she died, Epperly said he spent hours figuring out what to do. He wrapped her body in blankets, loaded it into his car, and drove to a remote wooded area in western Illinois. He buried her in a shallow grave, covering it with branches and leaves. Then he went home, cleaned his car, and tried to move on with his life, but he couldn't. According to his letter and subsequent police interviews, the guilt ate at him constantly. He had nightmares. He couldn't maintain relationships. He started drinking heavily. In the letter, he wrote that he'd attempted suicide twice because he couldn't handle what he'd done. Police located the burial site. Based on Epperly's directions, Karen Phillips's remains were there, exactly where he said they'd be. Forensic analysis confirmed the cause of death was strangulation, consistent with his confession. The case created an unusual legal situation. Epperly's lawyer argued that his client's voluntary confession and cooperation showed remorse and should result in a lighter sentence. Prosecutors agreed to a plea deal. Epperly would plead guilty to second-degree murder and receive 15 years in prison instead of facing a first-degree murder trial that could have meant life. Some people praised Epperly for finally doing the right thing. Others were furious that he got a reduced sentence for a murder that would have gone completely unpunished if he just stayed quiet. Karen's family, who had assumed for 14 years that she'd simply left town and cut contact, had mixed feelings. They finally had closure and could give her a proper burial, but they also had to relive the trauma of losing her. Stephen Epperly served his sentence and was released in 2009. He's lived quietly since then, and as far as public records show, he hasn't reoffended. But his case remains one of the strangest examples of a killer confessing to a crime that no one even knew happened. Case number 4. The doctor who killed his patients for life insurance. Dr. Michael Swangos seemed like the perfect doctor. He graduated from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine in 1983. He was articulate, professional, and eager to help people. There was just one problem. His patients kept dying under mysterious circumstances. Swangos' first red flag appeared during his residency at Ohio State University Hospital in 1983 and 1984. Several patients under his care died unexpectedly. When nurses started noticing a pattern that patients seemed to deteriorate specifically during Swangos' shifts, they reported their concerns to supervisors. An internal investigation was launched, but nothing concrete was found. Swango completed his residency without being charged. In 1985, he took a job as a paramedic in Illinois while trying to restart his medical career. That's when things got really disturbing. Swango's co-workers at the ambulance company started getting violently ill after drinking beverages he'd prepared. Several were hospitalized with arsenic poisoning. This time, investigators had something tangible. They searched Swango's apartment and found arsenic, along with books about poisons and murder. He was convicted of battery in 1985 and served 2.5 years in prison. You'd think that would end his medical career? It didn't. After his release, Swango managed to hide his criminal record and get hired at various medical facilities under false pretenses. He worked in South Dakota, New York, and even overseas. And everywhere he went, the patients died in unusual numbers. The FBI eventually caught up with him in 1997, but not for murder. They charged him with fraud for lying on job applications about his criminal record. While investigating those charges, they started looking deeper into patient deaths at facilities where Swango had worked. The evidence was damning. At one hospital in Zimbabwe where Swango worked in 1995, 5 patients died mysteriously over a period of just a few months. Witnesses reported seeing Swango inject patients with unknown substances shortly before they went into cardiac arrest. But Zimbabwe didn't have the resources to properly investigate, and Swango left the country before charges could be filed. Investigators eventually connected Swango to the deaths of at least 60 patients across multiple states and countries, though the actual number is likely much higher. In some cases, he injected patients with fatal doses of drugs. In others, he poisoned their IV fluids. The motive appeared to be a combination of financial gain from life insurance policies, and a disturbing fascination with death itself. In 2000, Michael Swango pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder. Cynthia Ann McGee, Amos Stillwell, and Thomas Samarco, all patients who died after he injected them with lethal substances. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During his sentencing, prosecutors revealed that Swango had kept a journal where he wrote about his killings, describing the power he felt when ending someone's life. Swango is currently serving his sentence at a federal prison in Colorado. He's now 69 years old and will die in custody, but the full extent of his crimes may never be known. Investigators believe he killed dozens more victims, possibly over 100, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He just did it with a stethoscope instead of a weapon. Case number 5. The perfect husband who wasn't. Scott Peterson seemed to have everything going for him in 2002. He was 30 years old, owned a successful fertilizer business in Modesto, California, and was married to his college sweetheart, Lacey Peterson. Lacey was 27 and 8 months pregnant with their first child, a boy they planned to name Connor. On December 24th, 2002, Christmas Eve, Scott called Lacey's mother at 5:17 p.m. He said he'd just gotten home from a fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina and Lacey wasn't there. Her car was in the driveway, her purse was inside, but she was gone. He said she'd been planning to walk their dog that morning and must have disappeared during the walk. The search for Lacey Peterson became national news. Thousands of volunteers searched the neighborhood. Her face was everywhere. Scott appeared on television multiple times, pleading for her safe return, offering a reward for information. But investigators were suspicious from the start. Scott's story had inconsistencies. He said he went fishing in the San Francisco Bay on Christmas Eve morning, even though it was cold and rainy. He couldn't remember what kind of fish he was trying to catch. He told Lacey's family different stories about where he'd be that day. Then detectives discovered Scott's affair. He'd been seeing a massage therapist named Amber Frey since November. He told Amber he was unmarried. On December 9th, just 2 weeks before Lacey disappeared, Scott had told Amber that this would be his first Christmas alone because he'd lost his wife. When confronted about the affair, Scott admitted it but insisted it had nothing to do with Lacey's disappearance. Amber, horrified to learn Scott was married with a pregnant wife, agreed to work with police. She recorded her phone conversations with him. In those recordings, Scott continued lying, even as the search for Lacey intensified. He told Amber he was in Paris for New Year's Eve, when he was actually at a candlelight vigil for his missing wife in Modesto. On April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog along the shore of San Francisco Bay discovered a male fetus. The next day, less than a mile away, a woman's badly decomposed torso washed ashore. DNA testing confirmed what investigators already suspected. It was Lacey Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. The bodies were found in the exact area where Scott had been fishing on December 24th. Scott was arrested on April 18th at a golf course near the San Diego border. He'd dyed his hair blonde, grown a goatee, and had $15,000 in cash in his car. His family claimed he wasn't fleeing. He was just trying to avoid media attention. The trial began in June 2004 and lasted 5 months. Prosecutors argued that Scott murdered Lacey because he didn't want to be a father and didn't want his affair discovered. They couldn't prove exactly how he killed her, but they theorized he suffocated her, then loaded her body into his boat and dumped her in the bay, weighted down with homemade concrete anchors. The defense argued the prosecution's case was entirely circumstantial. They had no murder weapon, no crime scene, no witnesses, and no definitive cause of death. They suggested Lacey could have been kidnapped by someone else and killed. On November 12, 2004, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder for killing Lacey and second-degree murder for killing Connor. He was sentenced to death. For years, Scott Peterson sat on death row at San Quentin State Prison, maintaining his innocence. His family continued advocating for him, claiming he was wrongfully convicted. In 2020, his death sentence was overturned due to jury selection issues, though his conviction still stands. He was resentenced to life in prison without parole. In 2023, Scott Peterson's case got new attention when the Los Angeles Innocence Project took it on, claiming there's new evidence that could prove his innocence. They're investigating whether a burglary that occurred near the Peterson home on December 24th could be connected to Lacey's disappearance. As of now, Scott Peterson remains in prison. He continues to deny killing his wife and son. Whether he's a wrongfully convicted man or a calculating killer who nearly got away with it depends on who you ask. But one thing is certain. On Christmas Eve 2002, Lacey Peterson and her unborn baby disappeared, and they were found dead in the exact spot where her husband said he went fishing that morning. These 5 cases show just how dark human nature can get when secrets, obsession, and violence collide. From Robert Durst's decades-long trail of death to Scott Peterson's Christmas Eve fishing trip that changed everything, these are the kind of stories that make you question what people are really capable of. Which case disturbed you the most? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into cases that defy belief, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I've got plenty more true crime mysteries coming your way. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.